Great. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. We're going to wait just a minute before we get started. Um, all right. Thank you, everyone, for joining the Data Innovation Forum. And today's session is Architecting for Always On Business Continuity and Disaster Recovery. My name is Parajat Sharma from Odaseva, and I'm very excited to be the host for this discussion. Before we get started, just a couple of notes. So this session is being recorded and you will receive the replay along with the recordings of all the forum sessions next week. That way you can revisit any of the insights shared throughout the event. Also, we'd love for you to participate. So please use the Zoom chat to share your questions and comments at any time. We'll make sure they're addressed during this session. And if not, we will follow up with you. And with that, let's dive in. So I am thrilled to introduce today's panelists who will be sharing their expertise with us all. Let's start introductions with Nadina.
Hello, everyone. My name is Nadina Lisbon. Of course, I'm a Salesforce certified technical architect. I've been in the Salesforce ecosystem for over a decade. I'm also a Salesforce MVP and a MuleSoft ambassador, and very passionate about Salesforce AI and its intersection.
Thank you, Nadina. Sam?
Yes, hello everybody in virtual world. My name's Sam Wadhwani, and I'm also a Salesforce CTA, a Salesforce MVP, and I've been working with Salesforce for about 15 or 16 years now, so I'm starting to feel like a dinosaur. Yes, I'm a director within PwC, leading our Salesforce architecture practice across sector, and sit within our customer-led transformation team.
Wonderful. And last but not least, Svet.
So I'm here as the newest CTA. So I've been CTA since last April. So April of 2024, in Salesforce ecosystem for almost 10 years. And I'm actually excited about all the same things that my fellow panelists are excited about. I'm also a principal technical architect at Banjaxed Solutions. We primarily focus on the legal industry, but we're expanding into other industry verticals as well.
Fantastic. Thank you, Nadina, Sam, and Svet. All right, well, let's roll in. Let's start off with how would you define always on in the context of Salesforce enterprise customers? And why is business continuity critical in those environments? So let's kick off with Nadina.
Yes. So I think from a always on perspective in the enterprise, you think about that 24/7, you think about that uptime of 99.99999 and how much of a nines you want to add to it. I like to think of it as consistency, about being reliable with the performance. And then when it really comes to why it's critical for business continuity, it's the cost of failure that we need to think about. What happens if your system is down? Can you afford for it to be down for hours, for weeks, hopefully not months? There's always critical things that happen on the enterprise. And whether you're doing supply chain or you're doing front of office, back of office, it's important to always have these systems available and reliable so that people can continue to work.
Fantastic. Svet, would you like to add anything?
Sure. So the classic definition is the probability that the system will perform its intended functions for a specified period of time under stated conditions. So as Nadina mentioned, so if we're talking about the nines, 99.99, the four nines, that's only 4.38 minutes per month of downtime. and then it exponentially goes down. So 5 nines is 20 seconds of downtime per month, and 6 nines, 2.6 seconds. So we as CTAs always think about what is the system of engagement versus system of record. And a lot of times Salesforce is both. For basically customer information, the Salesforce is both the system of engagement and the system of record. That means that the most up-to-date data lives in Salesforce. Now, if it's somewhere else and you can engage with the same data when Salesforce is down, God forbid, then you're in good shape. Otherwise, even if it's not the system of record, but it is a system of engagement, so that creates a huge problem for just about anybody. And formerly, I was working in the government sector, public sector in the United States. And there was a time where one of the Salesforce orgs was down. So basically, the work crawled to a halt very, very quickly. And so I would say Agentforce also introduces new scalabilities in terms of productivity and so on, but it also introduces new vectors of attack that we're just beginning to consider at the stage, consider and understand. So those is my
Yeah.
thoughts on the subject.
Yeah, well said. The new vectors of attack that are rapidly evolving. And we'll get to it in a minute. So thank you. And moving on. So let's get into some of the common causes for downtime or disruptions that one might find within large Salesforce orgs. And more importantly, what is it that architects can do to preempt, anticipate, and preempt them? So maybe let's start with Svet again, and then maybe Sam, you could offer your perspective.
So we can't talk about technical best practices without the best business practices. So we can have the best possible tech, but if there is a rogue system administrator who ends up doing making changes directly in production, that could bring the system down. So those will be the mature practices. If you bypass the DevOps pipeline and the various stage gates and introduce some, innocent code, which ends up being malicious, that could bring a system down. That's one such possibility. And there is no such thing as, oh, this is okay to do because Salesforce, this piece of code or functionality is not connected to anything. Just think about Salesforce as an org, like an organism. Everything is connected to everything else.
Fantastic, Sam. Would you like to add?
Yeah, so I would probably add to that is that there's a number of sort of external factors that can contribute to failure. So unexpected scale is probably one of them. So you may see peaks and troughs in traffic. You may see peaks and troughs in usage or exposure, things like that. Now, I think Svet touched on it a little bit before, but a lot of those things should be baked into your design process, your architectural decision-making process, and sometimes it can be failures due to misplaced choice of feature that are just not fitting what is anticipated in terms of usage, or it could be misplaced consideration for how that feature or that part of the platform or the technology as a whole is going to be used. So it has to start with design and the right considerations for what you're anticipating. So based on that, you've got your anticipated scale, you've got your unexpected scale, you've also got cyber risk, for example. You can't necessarily anticipate for when you might be attacked, whether it's a DDoS attack or it's some sort of phishing or vishing or whatever it is through your system of engagement. All of that needs considerations into how you're going to ensure the platform is standing up robustly, and if it does fail, how it recovers from those as well. So I'd say those are the main causes of failure or lack of consideration.
Yeah, that was really insightful. I think there might be questions coming in on that. So I do see a hand up. Would you mind putting the question in chat? And then we can answer it. We can take it during the panel or towards the end. Thank you. All right, I'll keep it moving. So far, so good. All right. Well, how do you approach building your DR plans, disaster recovery plans, right? And obviously, the critical elements within that are what does it cost you to build one? What kind of risk are you trying to mitigate? And how do you ensure business continuity or business needs? And more importantly, how do you balance it all? So I think this has been a hot topic for a number of customers. Sam, I'm going to have you start with this one.
Yeah, so for me, a disaster recovery plan's it's really about balance, right? Protecting what matters most, and that's a key part, without overspending on the things that don't. And so it starts with the business angle, not the technology, but it follows, in my view, a few key things. So the first one is mapping for impact. I'll just sort of rattle through these, and then I'll bring them to life a little bit. So mapping for impact, defining your objectives, which is also your target operating state, using patterns that correlate to the risk tier, and then testing and automating as much as possible. So just to bring that to life a little bit, first, I would sit down with the business owners and map which processes are truly critical, and crucially, what downtime would actually cost them. Okay. So sometimes it's not the obvious processes that cost the most, nor what's actually perceived as cost either. It might not actually be financial, it might be reputational, for example. A good example, I had a client in financial services who once sort of discovered through this process that disruption of their internal servicing platform caused actually more downstream cost than any of their marketing or customer facing apps. And that insight completely changed their investment priorities so that they focused elsewhere. So then next, once I know which processes are the most critical to the business to keep functioning, I would define what the recovery objectives are that everybody agrees on. And it's frequently, from a business angle, key to talk in plain terms. So I think Nadina actually brought these up as well, which with great questions like how much downtime can you actually tolerate, right? And how much data can you afford to lose? Those answers drive the technical design. So for Salesforce, in particular, that might mean deciding how often data is to be replicated with tools like Own Backup or Odor Saver, or how fast metadata could be redeployed and reinstated if we had to rebuild it with tools like AutoRabbit, GearSet, DevOps Center. These are all familiar to most people in the audience. But then we match the architecture to the risk, and this is a critical part, because not everything needs a hot standby. Some systems need and justify real-time replication in a warm standby pattern. Others, they're okay with daily backups and cold restores. The key here, though, is being deliberate about where you spend that money. Okay, and then the final point is on testing, and that's where it gets quite interesting. I like the phrase, test it like you mean it. It's beyond sort of standard drills. It's not a tick box exercise, any of this. I'm sort of, I hesitate to say, but I'm a big fan of something called chaos testing, which sounds really scary, right? But basically it means breaking things on purpose in a controlled way to see how well the systems and people respond. One public sector organization that I worked with actually routinely disconnected integrations in a sandbox just to make sure that things like I don't know, authentication or data flows, for example, recovered gracefully and failovers minimized impact to customers. And then finally, the automation point, whether it's sort of environment rebuilds, backups, or pipelines, things like that. You automate whatever you can within reason, but crucially don't hand over the responsibility and accountability to the tooling. Someone still needs to own and understand the plan and provide the oversight to make sure it's reasonable, that it's practical, and that it's achievable, that involves humans. At the end of the day, I think a good DR strategy is one that builds confidence and doesn't sort of reduce or doesn't sort of replace, sorry, or eliminate the risk. It makes sure that businesses can recover quickly and without unnecessary cost when something really does go wrong.
That's so well said, Sam. I like the organizational and people aspect of testing and DR planning. I also want to say I'm very happy that my kids don't know about chaos testing. But well said.
Natural.
Svet, anything to add to that?
I'll just say that if you think it's expensive to prepare, wait until the system goes down. They have no way to restore. It's just like the same concept as insurance of any kind. So what Sam said is just as applicable to small and medium-sized businesses as it is to enterprise level. Maybe your tooling does not have to be as extensive and as expensive because most likely you're going to all be in the same geography. But imagine that you've got this kind of follow the sun approach. The system truly has to be always on. Well, it also has to be able to recover quickly and gracefully, so productivity is not lost.
Well, I want to dig into something you just mentioned. Is there a critical distinction between DR planning at a large enterprise versus a SMB? Or should there be a critical distinction?
It's a matter of scale, I believe. So it's really how many people you've got, how many business units, what do they all do, and how many of them actually rely on Salesforce as a system of engagement, a system of record at any given time. I think that's what's going to drive it. But as far as the procedures, it's just you may have fewer procedures and fewer points of integration. That's, in my opinion, that's what that is.
Makes sense. Thank you. All right. Moving on. Nadina, I'm going to have you take this up first. So, what role would any kind of testing, and we delved into testing a little bit, simulation or failover planning play, right, in ensuring an architecture that's always on? I mean, we also talked about, the definition of always on at the beginning. And with regards to that, how might it change the nature of testing, simulation, and failover planning at enterprises?
Yeah, so just to kind of pick up where Sam had spoke about chaos testing, but before we get there, when I think about testing and I think about what it plays in terms of simulation, I think of it as moving from your theory to your practical. So you're thinking that, like, yes, this should work, but now as you go through these tests and making sure that everything is working, you help uncover gaps, you help figure out where is the weakness of the system. I am actually a fan of chaos testing because it's one of the things that I think when done well, it helps you really pressure test your system. And so one of the things I also like to look at is that shift left approach where you're testing earlier in the cycle to help ensure that as you're going through your development cycles, whether you're doing your load testing or just your unit testing, that you're actually writing these tests and these test scripts so that if something does happen, you are ready. And then when it comes to always being on and making sure that you are ready, I think being able to execute those tests in a simulated environment, but also being prepared that the system may go down, right? I look at events like when AWS, for example, went down, and systems that weren't necessarily connected to AWS because AWS was their backend, they also went down. Did people build in that plan of what happens if the provider goes down as part of the test plan, not just from a Salesforce perspective, but the enterprise perspective? And so I think from a testing, simulation, failover plan, you just need to ensure that, yes, these tests are practical, but also you're taking the time to refine the tests, make sure that they're actually working, and then have a workaround. So even if it's manual that you have performed, then it's not shelfware essentially that you just put on the side as part of your DR, but you actually say, you know what, every month we're going to cause a little chaos and just see what happens.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'd love you to elaborate shelfware in DR. Are you seeing a lot of that? And any thoughts on preventing?
I think what tends to happen is, at least from an enterprise perspective, there's a lot of work upfront to build the DR plan. But sometimes what will happen in most cases, nothing happens, right? So you've gone years without actually having something happen. And so the intentionality of making sure that you're using your DR and making sure that it works. Does this still work in 2025? Will it be the same in 2030? Probably not. I haven't seen a lot of it where DR plans are like shelfware, but more so there's aspects of it that have not been updated. So, when you think of the enterprise, yes, there's Salesforce, but there are other systems that are connected to Salesforce and other systems that are downstream or upstream from Salesforce. And so maybe we have a really good, strong DR plan for Salesforce, but we don't have a strong DR plan across the enterprise, across these other key critical systems like your ERP system, for example. And so I just bring it up that what tends to happen is we have the plan looks really nice, but we're not executing on the plan. We're not actually planning for the plan, so to speak.
Well said. Well said. Svet, anything to add to that?
Aside from tests being, realistic and independent, so shift left is also about test-driven development, but that's when you develop. And then I definitely agree with everything that Nadina said. Just consider this for a moment. So in this new era of AI can do the tests, right? We can use machine learning based continuous testing. It can make a lot of difference. But also consider that you have a high touch environment where lots of folks are coming to your site. It could be a Salesforce site or Experience Cloud, and they're not relying on knowledge articles so much anymore. So they're just going to be leveraging AgentForce for everything and all these chats. And what happens if that's no longer available? So they're going to be probably picking up the phone and calling your call center. But now that you've relied so much on AI, you've probably got rid of a lot of people who pick up the phone and talk to the customer. So what do? It's an overload. So maybe consider that as a possibility and plan for such an eventuality that the human element should be part of the test. And that so-called disaster recovery becomes a disaster prevention when you actually have people in place of AI that we're now beginning to take for granted.
That's very well said. We're getting some fantastic quotes from this call, moving from disaster recovery to disaster preemption. Fantastic concept. All right, well, let's move on that note to some execution and best practices. And Sam, I'd love for you to comment on this. What are the architectural patterns? And there's some examples here. You could do multi-org design. You could have failover and redundant environments. You could do data replication. That in the context of preempting disasters, in the context of enterprise scale resilience, are the most effective. And of course, we had also talked about balancing cost in that. So I'd love your perspective. What works and what makes most sense?
Yeah. So I think I'll first start by saying there's no one size fits all, right? There's no one approach, one pattern, one solution that provides the most effectiveness when it comes to resilience. I think at enterprise scale, it really comes, so effective resilience really comes from layering those patterns. There's no single design that can guarantee uptime, for example, right? And you have to take a whole estate approach. What that means is not just focusing on one specific platform or one specific technology in your enterprise, one specific process. It's highly unlikely to be that localized. You've got to look at the whole estate, and it's not just a technical one. You've also got to combine organizational views, regional views, and obviously data strategies, because we're highly dependent and increasingly dependent on data these days to continue running our businesses. But do that do that combination in a way that fits the business criticality and risk appetite. I was going to mention risk on the previous question as well. Now, there are indeed patterns that make quite a lot of sense, such as leveraging infrastructure-based availability zones, multi-instance failover. I won't necessarily call it multi-org, but multi-instance failover. Data replication, we already mentioned, and then third-party and integration approaches that can also sometimes be more effective when used in combination. Now, if I first take the multi-instance design, that pattern can really help to contain the risk. It's not about spinning up more instances or orgs for the sake of it, because that can obviously be quite costly, but it's about isolating workloads that have different concerns or different regulatory or release needs. So, for example, a global bank, for example, might run their retail business and wealth business separately to avoid cross impacts, but then and by doing that, they benefit by allowing independent recovery of each of those if something goes wrong. I'd say that particular model is a typical outlier because of the organizational structure. It's highly dependent on that could warrant that multi-instance approach. But typically, if you run all your divisions in the same org or instance, it can become quite costly to operate another instance just for recovery. Then there's the individual platform redundancy. So we can't and shouldn't ignore the fact that each platform, Salesforce's Hyperforce platform in particular, gives us built-in sort of regional resilience across multiple availability zones. But that's typically within region, right? So for a truly critical service, you need to think about design that is cross-region for your recovery plan. And that's what I call always on by design. You don't just rely on individual platforms or the platform's native resilience. You actually extend it to cover the region, right? Beyond the region, sorry. And then we talked, one of the suggestions was data replication. That's become a big part of continuity planning to date. There's a fundamental distinction between data backup and archiving. And I'm not necessarily going to go into that now, but replication is a pattern form of backup. And what we're talking about here is hot or at least warm storage of operational data. Features on the Salesforce platform like change data capture or event streams can keep a copy of that data in another store, for example, like a warehouse or a lake or a backup storage database, so that if your core org or instance is degraded, you can still serve read-only experiences to your users. But what I'd say with this pattern is that you should always, well, don't forget to plan to stand up the services that are able to access and retrieve that data in a useful manner to support continuity of the processes. What I tend to see is that it's treated a bit like a tick box. We've got a backup, we've got an archive, great, fantastic, we're resilient. Well, no, you're not really, because when things go wrong, how are you actually going to access that data in amongst the process that you're standing up to continue operating? It's just as crucial to do that, as well as have the backup or the replication of the data in the first place. And then there's the integration patterns that really matter too. So loosely coupling your services with event-driven designs, queues, and built-in sort of circuit breakers. They have those patterns stop one failure from impacting or cascading across your estate, whilst potentially then switching to an alternative mechanism as needed. And what that really does, if you ensure that that is incorporated by design, is it produces a huge impact. A small investment in the design pays off massively when things get messy. And so to sort of pull all those things together, I'd say aligning all of those patterns gives you a clear recovery time and recovery point objective that you can seek to achieve, right? We're not trying to make everything bulletproof. Actually, what we're trying to do is make everything, we're looking at using patterns that can limit the blast radius, that can manage uptime and thus continuity, and that don't, essentially trip each other up. That's what enterprise grade resilience is really about and looks like in practice, in my view.
And I think, Sam, you've covered a lot of ground there and wonderfully articulated all those patterns. I want to build on that. And Svet, I'd love to hear your thoughts, but also to Sam's point about all these options available. So in enterprise, that values agility, right? That is responding to the speed of the market. How do you prioritize all these options or all these sort of patterns available to you as you execute for enterprise scale resilience?
That's a huge question, and that's so. Number one, you hire an army of CTAs, and then we'll take care of all of that for you. But so, I'd like to actually respond to what Sam said about the looking at the whole estate. That's literally what we do: put together a system landscape. So we've been talking about a Salesforce-centric approach, where we need to be able to retrieve data, do something with it, and let's suppose Salesforce goes down. Okay. Now, what about the integrations? So we're not just Salesforce, what about the middleware? So we have MuleSoft, we have Boomi. So if that goes down, what happens? Can you still use your data? Is it going to be up to date? Is it going to be stale? Can you retrieve it? Can you run automation off of it? And so on and so forth. So going back to those integration patterns, so I'm a huge fan of event-based architecture. And of course, you can replay things, but that also introduces security risks such as replay attacks. So we have to think about that using replay IDs and nonces and so on and so forth. But just kind of let's keep in mind that it's not enough to just think about, well, Salesforce is up, so we're good, right? You need to be able to think about middleware going down, or if Salesforce is back up, how does the middleware get plugged back in and basically gracefully restores all the integrations. That's called system idempotency. And so that's a whole another huge topic that I'll be looking forward to a future data innovation forum for that whole
Yes,
discussion.
indeed. Yes, indeed. All right. Well, this was really insightful. There's lots to cover there. I'm going to move on to the next question, and Nadina, would love your perspective on this. How do you ensure that the updates or changes or customizations and integrations that admins, Salesforce admins make, don't actually compromise or impact adversely the business continuity plans that organizations have?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. And I think it's really around how mature you are from an enterprise perspective. So if you look at things like your maturity from your DevOps perspective, so I talked a little bit earlier about shift left when it comes to testing, and Svet brought out about shift left when it comes to your overall processes, so your DevOps processes. But really what you're trying to make sure is, how can I capture what my admins are doing, what my developers are doing in a cohesive manner? And I think having that not just the test driven approach, but having a really strong DevOps process that is able to test both from a business perspective as well as from your integrations, from the code written, will really help you with those customizations. And then when it comes to business continuity, and when it comes to doing upgrades, you really want to look at the plan that you're doing, right? So most times people are looking at a phased approach. Rarely are you looking at that big bang. You're trying to ensure that as you're doing these processes, you can do it in small, incremental, isolated, so that your system is always up, but then also being able to cut over so that you're not losing any data or any critical information as you're going through. And that in itself means that you need to have a strong rollback plan. So, we hope for the best, but we prepare for the worst. And so as you're moving these changes, if something happens, can you roll back to where the system was stable? And can you do it in a quick enough manner? Now with AI and everything that has been, shown at Dreamforce, things about the agentic enterprise and admins being able to have more conversations and being able to essentially build with AI, we're also looking at things where having AI do some of these things that you couldn't do before. So looking at your tests, looking at how it's writing your test scripts, looking at your rollback plan and ensuring that, yes, you can roll back efficiently. That will help with your customizations. And then really what you want to do as well for your integrations or any code you're writing is to make sure that you can fail gracefully. So you're thinking about, well, if we do have an error, is it an error that is consumable? Is it an error that is ingestible from a perspective that it's not just a big, stack trace that you see in Apex, but a simple error that can be logged and then managed.
Mm-hmm. Great. Svet, do you want to add anything on this one?
So DevOps is actually one of my most favorite topics. So DevOps and continuous integration, continuous delivery. It's not just the tools. It's not just how you utilize the tools, but it's a whole culture shift. It's the discipline. And first thing that a lot of folks need to realize in any kind of environment, small, medium, large business, enterprise business, is that it may look like it slows the process down when it comes to rollout. Even when it comes to recovery, you have a hotfix environment that you can actually test things and shoot directly to production, but should you? Or should you go to the staging environment to get to production? Because what if you're shipping new bugs while fixing old bugs? So overall, just imagine that if you don't have DevOps, you don't have any way to recover. But if you do, so that's what makes it pure gold. Then I'd also say part of this whole prevention strategy is to evaluate whatever product you end up using. So be it Salesforce or some application within Salesforce or an OEM product, not all of them are DevOps friendly, and not all of them are make it easy to build in the sandbox, propagate it up the pipeline, making sure that it goes smoothly through all the various stage gates. So essentially, some products are just simply immature, where the vendors will say, it's better if you did it directly in production. Well, then how do you recover? So you can commit it to source control, but again, that should be part of the consideration whenever you're evaluating a package or a product based on which your business is going to be successful.
Fantastic.
Yeah, if I could add to that,
Please.
I think one of the areas. I mean, we talked about the DevOps process. I can't disagree with any of that, but I would also say try to bake it into your governance process. We as architects tend to spend a lot of time in governance for very good reason, because we sit between the business end and the technology end. And so it's crucial in your governance model to have both business, product owners and so on, or business sponsors involved with the technical decision making, in that they should be challenging any designs, so as early as design, coming through and saying, well, how does this scale? How does it protect my business from any untoward effects that we may or may not be expecting, and it should be considered as as part of the stage gates to go through governance before it is then sort of in build to or deployment, for example.
Great. Yep, baking DevOps in governance. That is very well said. We are in the last 5 minutes of the panel, so I encourage the audience to ask questions, if any. And I'm going to move to the last topic, which is really looking out into the future. the next 3 to 5 years or so. So with AI and automation and advanced monitoring changes, how do you believe the enterprises should or would approach always on Salesforce architecture? So I'm going to open it up to all. Maybe Sam, you can start with your thoughts.
Yeah, sure. So I think the next, I'm going to be quite bold here. I think the next few years are going to completely shift how we operate rather than how we architect. So for some time now, I think we've had the concept of self-healing, and if you haven't, come on, catch up. But I do think we're already in a space where always on is moving away from being sort of the static design or operational goal. But I think it will increasingly be driven by intelligence, not just the redundancy. So, consider, as Svet said earlier, predictive and preventative operations, where AI starts to spot issues before they cause impact by looking at logs, patterns, observable measurements to either detect or flag when it's trending towards failure, or trigger an automated mitigation. So what we're talking about there is detecting sort of archetypal failure characteristics that are grounded in understanding the business, understanding the systems, and understanding the architecture. There's an opportunity there to identify and suggest the critical steps needed to resolve a continuity issue. And I think that is where AI can play. Even better, automatically switching traffic, for example, to a healthier node in the estate, or something like that, reduces but doesn't eliminate the need for human intervention, but it does protect in a more proactive way that is adaptive.
Well said. Well said. Nadina, 30 seconds, your take on the next 3 to 5 years.
Think with how things are going with the agentic enterprise, we're going to see a lot of decentralized decision making. So we have our agents that are working autonomously across the enterprise. And with that, these agents will also have that type of intelligence, just to piggyback off of Sam, to detect what is happening, to ensure that, as things are happening, we can switch things out. So kind of similar to what we have now with like synthetic users that would check business processes, but from a AI agentic perspective.
Great. Thank you, Nadina. Svet, I know this can also be a topic of discussion in the next forum, but can you summarize? 30 seconds, take it away.
So we need to move the cloud architecture from always on to always adaptive. And so what exactly does that mean? I would say we're going from reactive to predictive to autonomous operations. And then the automation, we actually need to move that into the deep layer so that all of that logic is going to be baked into workflow orchestration and remediation, as well as let's not forget about observability and resilience. So that needs to become embedded rather than looked at as an add-on, which is currently considered a luxury by some, but must be a necessity in the future for all.
Very insightful. And that's all that we have time for. So thank you for joining today's session. On behalf of Otis Seva, I'd like to extend our sincere thanks to all our amazing speakers for sharing their insights. If you have any questions, please drop them in the chat now, or via the post-event survey that will appear when you close this window. We also invite you to check out the other great sessions available as part of the Data Innovation Forum. And with that, wishing you a wonderful day or evening, wherever you are joining us from. And thank you again for being part of this conversation. Take care, everyone.
Thank you so much. Take care.
Bye.
Thank you.